Hello and welcome to Who's Your Caddy? I'm your host, Kelly Singh, and in this episode, we'll briefly reflect on last week's picks and then dive into the upcoming PGA Tour event, the Amex. My co-host, Adam, will give you some background on the course, and we'll both give you some of our favorite picks to build out your DFS lineups this week. So hold tight. Oh, you caught me rubbing my eye. This podcast is meant to help take your DFS golf game and even some of your prop bets to the next level. So whether you are a beginner or a seasoned pro, we hope you'll find this podcast helpful. But before I continue rambling on and on and on, let me bring in my co-host, the goose to my maverick, or probably the other way around, Adam Hallas. Adam! Woo!
Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
What's happening?
Not much. A little golfy golf.
Mm-hmm.
Last week was our kickoff episode for the 2024 season. I was a little bit nervous. I'm not going to lie, because looking at the results, I'm very happy with them, but there were some that fell out and missed the cut that I had no idea would miss the cut. Like Thigala missed the cut, Kuchar missed the cut. We were talking backstage about Hadwin missing the cut. He wasn't on my list, but he was on yours. And I was just like, oh my goodness, what is going on? How did you do last week?
Outside of those, I would say had lost and Sahith. I inexplicably, in my crunch for fantasy crunchers, put in David Lipsky as my what the fuck type pick and put him in there. And he was more of a virus than a supporter. And he was at +1 round one. I was like, all right, come on, buddy. Come on. Let's do this round two. He completely shit the bed. First 4 holes, he went into the water. And I think he had 9 bogeys, 2 double bogeys, 3 birdies. I was like, well, I could have done that. So he completely just kind of fell apart, which is fine. It's the first outing. And so I played really light. So I was like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I played pretty light on my lineups this week too, just getting a feel for everything starting off our new season. I checked back on my notes and rattled off 14 players that I had at least marked in my notes, where I either gave them as a name or gave some data behind it. Of those 14, 10 of them made the cut, which means 71% of those picks went on to score throughout the entire tournament. So that's good news. 2 of them in the top 10, 4 in the top 20, 7 in the top 30. What was really interesting, I look back on my notes, I didn't put this in our show notes, but 3 people from the show, KH Lee, Cam Davis, and Matthew Neesmith, all tied for 30th. Oh, and Adam Svensson, all tied for 30th, which I found to be pretty amazing. What are the odds of that? That 4 players named in the show all not only made the cut, but all tied for 30th. I thought that was funny.
That is pretty funny. The other thing I was going to say too, cashing last week would have been hard because I think 20 to 30% of people had 6 out of 6 was a very high percentage. Typically, you see between 5 to 10% on most what we call multi-entry contests. So,
yeah,
you really had to have the optimal lineup to have a good, ROI.
Very true. We didn't talk about this last week, but when you're making your prop bets, some of the prop bets I like to do the most are those who land in the top 20. That's one of my very favorite prop bets. So feel free to use these players in those top 20, top 10, top fives, and any combination of that in your prop bets, because you would most likely be able to cash there if you didn't cash in your DFS. So just something to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you do that?
Yeah. Funny story. We can't do that yet in Missouri. We can do it on the KC side. But I would say, coincidentally enough, the Cardinals are trying to lead the way on getting gambling associated with Missouri. Now, it's going to be a hard case because I'm sure the lobbyists on the Kansas and both Illinois side are saying, no, we want to have the percentage. So
I get it. It was a very hard road here in Arizona with all of our Indian gaming casinos, but they came to an agreement and things are going well. But this week, Adam, we're talking about the Amex, played in La Quinta, California. I love La Quinta. And it's at PGA West. Tell us about this course.
Yeah, so the tournament usually does a 3-course rotation, but the only shot link information is on the stadium course. So if you have players teeing off on Thursday that are not on the stadium course, you'll just have to catch up on their scores and not necessarily track the shots. That being said, there is a lot of water on this course. Holes 5, 6, 7, and then 10, 11, 12, and then 13. All have water on them. And it's not like a little bit of water on some. It's like right next to the green or off to the left of the fairway. This course is a fairly short course. It's under 7,200 yards. Last year's winner, I think, was at minus 27. So it can be a birdie fest, and more often than not, it will be again this week. Typically, people that play in the Sunny and then play in this do well. And now you can take that as they're just getting experience and warming up, getting to the season. Or the courses play similar in the fact that they have a similar rough, similar feel in the fairways. They both play similarly in that it's a relatively resort-like course. So
that makes sense. And some of the names that we're going to talk about today are many of the names that made the cut, not only made the cut, but did very well in last week's tournament. So all of that makes a lot of sense. We've been toying with the way that we want to execute on this show, kind of the flow, but I always come back to just giving a handful of players. I don't like the formula of this tier, this tier, this tier. That feels boring to me, but I do always end up saying, this is a top tier. I'm going to start with the top tier. You're going to spend the most of your money on one of these players. You don't have to. There are plenty of players that are not in that 10,000 plus tier that you can build a lineup with, but we're going to share with you a couple in 10,000 plus range that we like. And I'm starting my first two in the 10,000 and then another in the 9,000. You made a note for me that these happen to be the highest rostered golfers in the field, which is fine with me. I'm among the people that makes me feel good about my pick, and it also makes me want to put them in some prop bets. But I'm going to start with Sungjae at 10.1K on DraftKings. He's projected for 98 points, which is quite a few if you're not familiar. They're usually like 105 might be tops. He tied for 5th 2 weeks ago at the Century. And I just love that he is second in par fours. His putting average is first. His birdie average is first. I love Sungjae M this week, and I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't win. Putting that out there now.
You guys have a good course. It's always been in the top 10, top 5. I could see him trying to pull it out this week. It's going to be a tough week, even though it's a birdie fest. The cut for the past 3 years has been around -6 and -7. So last week was at -2, so that gives you any indication of what it's going to be like this week. I think Sungjae is a pretty good pick.
But who do you like?
Who do you like? So in this range, I like Xander. He's number 8 in my model, and he ranks well for approach around the green, P-dye courses, and it has pretty good history here. It's weirdly, he has slightly less ownership. It's still fairly high. It's tiptoeing into the teens. But he does well on this course, especially in approach. We're looking at 150 and 175. And he does pretty well on par 5s. And those par 5s, you need to do well in order to get those points, get those birdies. So I like Xander in this position.
I like Xander too. I did a model that was pretty much just like a base model, no super flair to it other than what I typically look at. Course fit, course history, performance, and stuff like that. But Xander came out 3rd and Sungjae 4th in this model. Just throwing that out there. It's leading with Scottie and Patrick Cantlay, but we'll talk a little bit more about them later. Well, I'm moving on, Adam. I'm moving along. I'm not going to sit here and just keep giggling, I promise. I could, but. So we have the next tier, which is, it's not even a real tier. I'm just saying these are players that are in the 8 to 9K range. They're still pretty pricey, but I wanted to make sure I threw out a couple that I had my eye on and why. And I know that you have a handful or that you still would like to talk about. And I'm not sure if all of these are in the same. You'll have to tell us. I know that some of them are much not as expensive, but we have JT Poston, and he happens to be, along with Sungjae M, one of the most highest rostered in this field. And I'm okay with that because I'm going to zig somewhere else. 9.1K on DraftKings, projected for 91 fantasy points, tied for 5th at Century, along with Sungjae M. And he also placed 6th last week at the Sony Open. But I like his stats. They're not quite as showy as Sungjae's, but they're great. They're in the top of the field for sure. Birdie average 12th, putting average 23rd, scoring average 19th, strokes gained 23rd. I think that he's a very well. Oh, I'm looking at Akshay. Dang it. Let me repeat that. Strokes gained 6th. Greens and regulations 18th, putting average 26th, scoring average 5th, par 4 23rd, birdie average 19th. Still very tops up there for 9.1K. That is what you get. And for the first 2 tournaments, scoring up there in the top 6, not too shabby. I'm going to pay for it. What do you think about that?
I like JT Poston. He's in my list as well, or pool. Overall, when I crunch lineups, I looked at his projected ownership. I was like, for JT? But given that he's pretty good, he's been doing great. Century, he was 5th. Sony Open, he was 6th. He's on a roll. His putting's been terrific. His around the green's been terrific, and his approach has been terrific. And so I see why people like him, especially at 9,100, which I still think a little expensive for him, especially when you have Xander and Scottie Scheffler in this field. But I can see why.
Yeah, I can see why too. But when you look at his percentages, like you can start looking at the percentages to make the cut and all of those pieces of data, it does shake out for him to be among the best. I mean, 72% likelihood to make the cut all the way down to like a 10% to make the top 5. That's a really high number, by the way, to make the top 5 in a field. So if anything about these projections are true, then you are getting a value even at 9,100. Because there are some that we're going to talk about later that are just not good values, and you can pick up somebody far less expensive and get the same kind of stats. But I like it. I like Sungjae Im. I like JT Poston. I also like Akshay Bhatia. And not quite as expensive, 8.2 on DraftKings, still projected for plenty of fantasy points, 86 of them, in fact. And then he tied 14th at Century and 13th at Sony. And I think what I like best about him is I already accidentally gave some of his stats, but birdie average is 12th, par 4s 29th, scoring average 19th. That's what we want them to do, is score for us. So I like that 8.2K for Akshay Bhatia. Is he in your pool as well?
Akshay is not. He actually is in my pool. I do have someone around that range, in the 8,000s. I put Eric Cole, who's 8,800. He's around 18% ownership, which is a little high. But his percentage to make the cut is fairly high as well. And so he ranks 5th in the field for approach. He ranks 4th in putting. Not great off the tee, 122nd, but I really only need him for his approach and putting. So we'll see how he does on the water holes. Hopefully he'll take it easy a bit, but he did well at the Sony Open. He did 13th Century. He was at 14th, even though it was a no-cut event. He still did fairly well there.
Yeah, for sure. You have a handful of names here. Do you want to dive in deeper with any of them, all of them? Do you just want to mention them? Go for it. This is your time, Adam.
Oh, thank you. So a little bit on my other pool is or other list of guys is Adam Hadwin. I'm going back to him only because he played in the Sony. I think he plays well here. Course is set up for him, and gosh darn it, he's going to do well finally. And then Taylor Montgomery, he needs to be in this field as well. I think he's number 2 in my model. Again, my model is heavily weighted on approach around the green and putting, and par 5 scoring, and so he's going to shake out well here. He's been doing well. How many times can you say "well" in one sentence? But he did pretty good at Sony Open, tied for 3rd or 13th. He ranks number 1 in my model for shots gained on total. Ranks 4th in putting, so I think Taylor Montgomery can do it. His ownership is at 16%. His salary is at 8,100. A fairly good percentage to make the cut, so I like them here. And then I also have EVR, Eric Van Rooyen.
Yeah, buddy.
At 7,500, he's got good value, and at 12% ownership at 7,500 price, I think everyone else is jumping on that bandwagon too. Now he made the cut. He made the cut at Sony, but barely. He kind of went backwards Saturday and Sunday, tied for 52nd. But around the green, his approach, and he's done very well here at La Quinta. So I'm hoping in course history and his approaching around the green kind of help him out there.
I hope so too. He's in my pool, and also he's on my fantasy team for FSGA. And I'm hopeful that he does well this week as well.
Yeah.
When we talk about mid-tier golfers, there are so many that we could talk about, but what I wanted to do was grab two of these mid-tier golfers that are very similar in stats and salary range and projections and everything, and kind of look at them. What are we getting for our money when we look at Adam Schenk and Aaron Rai? Schenk is 7.6K on DraftKings, Rai 7.7. Both projected for 84 fantasy points. And then they have some different skill sets. Neither of them are great putters, I must say. They're very average when you look at the entire field, 69th and 70th in the entire field. So they're actually kind of below average, to be honest, in putting. But if we want to talk about greens in regulation and just getting onto the green with the approach, if he's trapped in the sand, Adam Schenk is our man. Third in greens in regulation, first out of the sand. Didn't do too shabby at the Century, tying for 29th. Then we have Aaron Rai. He is first in driving accuracy. I mean, that's great. He's starting out great. He doesn't quite have the approach skill that Adam Schenk has. He tied for 57th at the Sony. So if you're spending a mid salary and these guys actually have better stats than the other people in said tier, which would you choose? Adam, who lands the green pretty much every hole, or Aaron, who has an excellent drive?
It's like a choose your own adventure.
It is, for sure.
It is. So I'm going to flip to page 34 for Adam Schenk, because I think greens and regulation outweigh driving accuracy on this portion of it. We kind of look and take apart the winner. What have the winners done? Well, they've done well in par 5 scoring. They've done well in approach, and they've done well in putting. And their short game has been fairly good as well. Ball striking has been, those top 10 finishers have been getting 1.5 or more in their ball striking and about 1.2 in short game. So I would definitely take the approach in putting in par 5 in greens and regulation way more than I would in driving accuracy.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's the direction I was leaning as well. Adam Schenk. I just find it interesting when I see in some of the stat sheets that we climb through, when they get the same kinds of points projections, similar salaries, similar percentages, and it doesn't quite feel right. So I'm with you. I like Adam Schenk at 7.6K on DraftKings far more than I like Aaron Rai. So I just thought that was a fun little segment to throw out there.
It was.
Yeah. Another fun, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say driving accuracy in the past for winners has been less than 60%.
Well, there we go. I mean, we really want to look at driving accuracy when we know it's a narrow course, for instance. So I don't necessarily think that's the case this week, but I just wanted to call that out.
All right.
But another kind of fun thing I stumbled on as I was pulling together my picks this week was there are a handful of golfers who are wildly overpriced, and you can get a golfer with a lesser name but similar odds for far less. One of them I don't have in my notes is Ricky Fowler, wildly overpriced in my opinion. You can do far better with an Austin Eckroat or a Taylor Montgomery. Actually, I like Taylor Montgomery better in that case, and he happens to be in your pool. Better than Ricky Fowler this week. They have similar chances, similar stat lines. I would not pay $9,000 plus for Ricky Fowler this week. But the one I really wanted to talk about and really stood out with to me was Will Zalatoris. 7.9K, which is not a king's ransom. He has a 52% chance to make the cut, says the model, but that is far lower than others in this tier. Stefan Jaeger, for instance, same price, 67% chance to make the cut. Zalatoris projected for 77 fantasy points. Again, far less than those in his tier. Jaeger's projected for 86 points. So I'm not paying up for Zalatoris or any kind of hype. I'm going to pay for Jaeger at the same price. Or why don't we pay $1,100 less and add Joseph Bramlett, who has a higher percentage chance to make the cut at 55, and he's projected for one more fantasy point at 78. Save some money, have the same outcome potentially. I just found that really interesting. I know you came across something similarly, but yours is more around the rostership of those players.
Yeah, and honestly, I was looking at two players. Patrick Cantlay is at 22% ownership, and he's he's in the top tier range, right? He's in the 10,000s. And at that point, I was looking at it, I was like, Scottie Scheffler's projected to be less owned. I was like, what? Now, it could be that it's his first time back. He's going to, get some of those, rust off. So maybe people are kind of easing back a bit. I was like, well, if I didn't go for Scottie, who else would I go for? And I was like, well, maybe Jason Day. And Jason Day did okay at the Century. Again, a no-cut type tournament. But if you're entering the season and you want to shake off the rust, you want to go with the no-cut tournament. Now, he didn't play last week, and typically that goes against the grain of those that do well this week. So I'm looking at pivoting off of Cantlay and either putting in, yes, I know, Scottie Scheffler or Jason Day.
Okay. I like that. I like that a lot because we can't fit everybody in. You can't fit all the top tier players in. So it's important, I think, to make those comparisons and have reasons why you would drop down or maybe choose a different player at that same price.
Yeah.
Other players I'm considering this week, I just want to throw them out there before we wrap up because it's important. We've already mentioned two of them on my list a few times, Stefan Jaeger, Eric Van Rooyen. I like them a lot this week. And Sam Burns, I also like a lot this week. On the more value side, Alex Smalley seems to fit well in my model. So I wanted to throw those out there for you guys to peruse at your leisure. Did you have anybody else you wanted to reiterate this week, Adam?
Well, I was looking at my list and I was like, well, dang it, I already said Jason Day, but Tom Kim is also up there for me. I know he's not one of those like value added players that you typically throw in your roster to help facilitate the top tier guys, but he's kind of in the middle of the pack, and I think he does well this week.
I like Tom Kim this week too, to be honest with you. I tossed his name around a lot. He comes out 11th in my model. Still in the top 70 percentile to make the cut of all the field. So I like that. Like that for props as well, if you guys are into props.
I am, just not in this state.
Just not in that state.
Yep.
Well, I think that's about it. Anything else you want to shout out to the peeps?
No. If you have any questions, just give us a hoot, a tweet, an X. I don't know anymore on our handles at Mr. Hallas or at Kelly. We'd be happy to have a conversation somewhere on the social medias, on Threads.
On the social medias.
Reddit. I don't care. I'll find you.
Be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment, tell all your friends. And as Adam said, you can find me at Kelly and Phoenix, Adam at Mr. Hallas on the app formerly known as Twitter. Thank you, Club Fantasy and Women of Fantasy Football, for your support of our show. And we'll see you guys next week. Bye.